Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast. My name is Christopher Harris. I'm joined by my co-host, Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, how are you doing? The European seasons are mostly over. There's still some games left in different leagues. Obviously, on the US side, I know you're super busy in terms of all the news, especially about kind of lower division soccer. But how are you doing so far?
Yeah, it's just been a really busy time with the European seasons ending. Obviously, we've got the big finale in Serie A coming this weekend, as in addition to the championship promotion playoff final. So not quite over yet, and then we'll have the Champions League final. But then big summer of tournaments, as well as everything going on domestically, and the coming launch of the USL Super League in August, a women's league that's going to be a D1 league, which a lot of people are not talking about yet, but I think is going to be a pretty big deal on the domestic soccer landscape.
But you mentioned too, like some of the things still going on. We got the Bundesliga playoffs too, with the relegation playoffs. You got Dusseldorf and Bochum fighting basically to try to figure out who's the one that's going to go up or who's the one that's going to go down. There's a lot going on. When I go on social media, I see so much opposition to the way that the leagues are structured from both sides. So I mean, you and I and many of our listeners and even basically millions of soccer fans around the world have been completely enraptured in the last, all season, but the last several weeks with all of these title races going down to the final day. You had the Women's Super League in England being determined on the very final day of the season on goal difference, right? Chelsea winning it on goal difference. You look at the Bundesliga and the fight for European places, but also onto the last day of the season with the relegation battle, and then also Bayer Leverkusen fighting to try to get a unbeaten records in German soccer. You look at the Premier League and you mean coming it down to the very last day of the season, Manchester City and Arsenal. If Man City had tied, Arsenal could have won the title, and then the relegation battle. Even though mathematically it was still open, Luton had a chance, but I mean that was a pretty miraculous chance at that. So on and so forth, right?
Yeah. I'm Serie A right now. Let's focus on that. That's finales this weekend. You have four teams that could still go down with one spot to go down, right? There are four teams, and Lecce just out of it, just very and Verona very lucky to be out of it. So there has been incredible drama this year at the bottom of Serie A. In fact, it was about 2 months ago. I was paying attention to Serie A. I always do, but someone told me, hey, you really need to focus on the relegation fight in Serie A. It's like nothing we've seen in years, and certainly that's been the case. And a lot of drama heading into this final weekend, which is very different than what you get in leagues in the United States. We'll just make the segue now.
I mean, I mentioned it a few minutes ago, but there's been so much like opposition, or so many people kind of hating on the way that it's established with the title races. I'll give you two examples. One of them was from Yahoo Sports, Henry Bushnell, who oftentimes writes good, thoughtful, analytical pieces about the U.S. men's national team, etc., about Major League Soccer and other big stories. But his big thing was in an article last week is that basically with the Premier League, let's go ahead now the season's over. Let's go ahead and take the top four teams and have a playoff to determine who wins the Premier League. That's the first example. The other example was our friend Max Bredos saying like, hey, on the final day of the Premier League season, why are all the games being played at the same time? Let's go ahead and split it up. Let's have half of the games on that Sunday and then the other half on the following Sunday. And to me, Kartik, I just don't understand why people are trying to change something that is practically perfect. I mean, to me, this has been one of the most entertaining seasons in a long time. I mean, and I think you would probably put Italy number one, but I would put the Bundesliga number one in terms of how good of a season it's been. Finally, right? We've broken the Bayern Munich monopoly in the Bundesliga. And not only that, they finished third. And it was just all of it coming down to the last few minutes. And I don't want to make this about Pro Rel, but you can also see if whether it's from the National League, League Two, League One, Championship, Serie A, even fighting like with Claudio Ranieri, fighting to try to stay up, and Calgary staying up, and the jubilations, Luton Town getting relegated, and the fans giving them a standing ovation, like basically applauding them off the pitch for putting in such a good fight this season to try to stay up against all the odds. And I just don't understand why people are wanting to change all of this, because to me, it's so entertaining.
I think you and I disagree on the Premier League. I thought it was pretty dire this season, personally. The relegation fight was only aided by points deductions, and Aston Villa finished fourth in the league. I don't think they'd finish in the top four in any other major European league. But to your point about the Bundesliga, oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, I think about that relegation fight or relegation playoff fight. I guess this is, when we bring the playoff word into it, we have to remember it's a relegation playoff, right? Relegation promotion playoff. Same thing with the football league, as you mentioned, all those leagues. It's a promotion playoff, because I think the argument guys like Henry Bushnell now are making is that there are, quote, playoffs in Europe. Right, there's playoffs for Champions League or European spots in Belgium and in the Netherlands. But they all are playoffs with some sort of tie-in to either promotion and relegation or a spot in another competition, right? They're not playoffs to crown a champion. And I think what Bushnell completely misses in his piece, because I thought it was a little just really short-sighted, in that he says there should be a playoff in the Premier League because Manchester City didn't beat any of the other top teams, okay? Which is true. But time and again in England, and I think if I went through Germany and Italy and Spain, we'd probably find this also. Time and again in England, and it's happened repeatedly with Manchester City, the reason they win the title is because they don't drop points to the teams at the bottom. That the teams they're competing with in 2013-14, it was Chelsea and Liverpool, both of whom got the best of City that season, but City didn't drop points to Sunderland that year, or Aston Villa, or whoever at the bottom. Same thing this year with Arsenal, right? Who were chasing them, and Liverpool, who were chasing them. There's other examples of this. In fact, Liverpool lost the title in 2018-19 by drawing a couple of teams that were outside the top half. Okay? So this is a ludicrous argument, really offensive, because crowning a league champion is about your excellence over the course of 34 matches if it's Germany and France, 38 if it's Italy, Spain, England, right? And that includes not losing or drawing teams at the bottom. You don't just take the results against the other top teams. We might as well just have a 4-team league then, or a 6-team league then. That's what I found so. If he was making an argument about, we should have playoffs because the schedule is unbalanced, or it adds another a layer of competition, I don't agree with him, but I might have taken it more seriously. But he actually led into his argument talking about Manchester City's record against the teams that were chasing them this year. That is irrelevant. That's why for years, and Chris, you know this, and you've seen me tweet about this for probably a decade, I don't like the term six-pointer when it comes to games between teams at the top. I know NBC has to do that. I know Sky has to do that. I know other rights holders have to do that to build up interest. But these league titles are decided by who you drop points to. Same thing actually happened one of the Fergie years at Chelsea, at Man United, when they held off Chelsea. Right? They just did not drop points to the teams at the bottom the way Chelsea did. That's what matters. And so I found the whole argument very bizarre. I mean, basically, let's just create a super league of 6 teams was his argument, in my opinion. I thought it was a ridiculous article.
I agree completely. I will go back to one thing you said, Kartik. You did say that the Premier League season this season was dire, which I think is ridiculous. Like, what for you would make this the Premier League less dire? I mean, what are you looking for?
Okay, so I think the bottom 3 were kind of nailed on most of the season, with the exception of the points deductions, and still they didn't get out of the bottom 3. I think you saw the big clubs like Manchester United, Newcastle, and Chelsea, have a disproportionate number of injuries, which really hurt the season. I think you had more soft goals conceded this season than I've ever seen in England in the top flight. You had a club in Aston Villa that was shaky, get to fourth. I think it's great they got to fourth, but I mean, they lost their last match 5-0. Not that it mattered, but that to me was problematic. I have seen more bad giveaways and inconsistent play in England this year than I have in about a decade in the Premier League. Now, I think part of that has to do with the number of injuries. And I mentioned 3 clubs in particular: Newcastle, Chelsea, Manchester United, all had. And I know everyone wants to beat up on Ten Hag, but the truth is they've had a ton of injuries, like a historic number of injuries. And I would put Newcastle in that category too, with like a historic level of injuries. They came on strong at the end of the year because they had most of their squad back. Oh, and plus the suspension to Tonali, right? Let's not forget that. But I think all of this conspired to make the league not as watchable this season as it's been in the past for someone like me who likes football. And is not someone who says, oh, if a game is 6-5, it's a great game, but if a game is 0-0, it's dire. And I do think the ease at which Manchester City and Arsenal got results late in the season, with the exception of the last match for Arsenal, which I don't understand that officiating, but that's probably a subject for another podcast or another media outlet. Arsenal were beating teams 5-0, 4-0, 5-0. Manchester City, kind of the same thing. That hasn't happened that often late in the season in Premier League title races. So I think there were a number of factors. I mean, I would put 4 or 5 different factors as to why this was one of the worst Premier League seasons I've seen in 2 decades. But I would also say these things are very cyclical. Next year, it might be very different. Newcastle may be fit. Manchester United may be fit. Chelsea had a young team. You could have 8 teams fighting for honors, and Spurs are going to be better next year, I think. So I think it's a cyclical thing. But this season, I would certainly say the Italian league has been more exciting for me. Although, but here's the point, Chris, I think, and why you can push back. Italy, you still, when you watch a match on television, which is what we do in the United States, it just still... the production isn't very good. Like, the mics seem to be in the wrong place. The commentary is okay, but not great. The stadiums are kind of cavernous. There are lots of empty seats, or there's a track or whatever. And then the other league I would argue was better than England this year was Germany. I would actually make the same argument about La Liga that I'm making about the Premier League. We like to focus on the Premier League on this show, but I thought this was a really down year for La Liga. I mean, this is a very weird year because you could, I would say, over the course of the last 15 years, either La Liga or the Premier League has been the best league in the world. Although maybe one year here or there, the Bundesliga popped in. This year, I think they both have fallen. I would actually rank Serie A 1, Bundesliga 2, Premier League 3, Spain 4. I know they might win Champions League, but I think it was a really weak year in La Liga, even weaker than in England.
Yeah, I think the irony here is that with the Premier League is that it's the league that everyone's watching. And even those who hate the Premier League, I'm not including you in this, Kartik, but even those who hate the Premier League are watching the Premier League. It has become the one league that everyone's watching. It's kind of the common denominator. And I think in many ways, too, in terms of perception, when you're looking at a game, and we've had this before, too, this discussion, you're looking at something completely different than what I'm looking at. If it is a Man United against Liverpool FA Cup encounter, and it's one of the greatest games of all time, you're looking at it from the opposite perspective, as it was just a horrible game, horrible defending, lots of mistakes. So I think at the end of the day, and this is just for not just the two of us, but I think for the listeners and everyone, it's subjective, right? We're all looking for different things. If we had Derek Ray on this podcast right now, he would give us 10 reasons why the Bundesliga is the best. If we had Matteo Benetti on, he would give us 10 reasons why Serie A is the best. And at the end of the day, whichever league it is, as long as the fans are enjoying it, which sometimes if you're a team in the relegation battle, it's very difficult to. But for me as a neutral, I have nothing against any leagues, right? I mean, I'll watch Major League Soccer and I'll take enjoyment out of watching that, whatever it may be. It's all subjective, and I think we're all. It seems to be that we're all watching the Premier League more than others, even though it's not the most perfect league. Tactically or technically is probably a better description.
Yeah, tactically it might be a better league than the others, because I think the one thing the Premier League does have right now is a concentration of the great managers. So if you were to take a table of the Premier League managers, I don't know, 2011, 2012, that time period, and compare it to now, you would be struck that teams in mid-table, the Wolves, I mean, Gary O'Neill's done exceptionally well, but teams like Bournemouth and Crystal Palace now with Oliver Glasner coming in, uh, they have a level of manager they didn't have in the past. When I say that, and I have to say I have a lot of respect for English managers and for managers from the British Isles, but when I made that comment to people have gotten very kind of defensive, British
Mm-hmm.
people and nativists, saying, "Oh, you're saying Oliver Glasner is a better manager than Alan Pardew." Yeah, I am actually. You're saying Ariola is a better manager than Sam Allardyce. Yeah, and then I think the other point on the Premier League, just to wrap this up, is everyone is watching it, Chris, but there's not enough analysis of what has actually happened. Newcastle, disproportionate number of injuries. Man United, look, maybe Ten Hag isn't the right guy. I don't know. That club is a mess. It's been a mess for a decade or more. But you cannot continue to criticize Manchester United without looking at the sorts of teams they've had to field this season. Compared to what the ideal 11 would be. And then obviously Chelsea has had a lot of injuries as well, and it's an inherited problem for Pochettino. I argue um, 3 years ago, Thomas Tuchel, the year that Liverpool and Man City, it was decided in the last 10 minutes, that Man City Aston Villa match, remember? I argue Chelsea is in that title race the whole way if Reece James and Ben Chilwell don't get injured. I think Tuchel had them playing well, and then after those two guys got hurt, he went ultra defensive and they fell off. Reality is they've had that injury issue with those two fullbacks for 3 years, and that's continued now through several subsequent managers. But you can't analyze Chelsea without analyzing that, and I think that's not been analyzed enough.
So the reason I bring this up, Kartik, is as far as us talking about title races, promotion races, relegation battles, and all these different things, is oftentimes when I'm posting these messages or showing video of what happens, there's like kind of an army of people. It's the same people every single time. They're like, that stinks. Like, how can you celebrate a team that won the title? They should have playoffs. So, like, playoffs are so much better, and all these different things. And it's a constant onslaught, which is funny. But one tweet that came up too, that from someone we know, Simon Evans, who's a journalist who writes for AFP, who used to write for Reuters. And one of his tweets in the last couple of weeks, I noticed, I came across, and it says, fundamentally, English football should do English football in England, with promotion and relegation and with no playoffs. American soccer should do American soccer in its own unique American way. And this was a pretty deep one, actually, when I thought about it more and more. I was like, okay, what is the American way, Kartik? What is the unique American way? Is it just the playoffs? Is that what makes it unique, in your opinion?
No, I mean, I think that there are definitely indigenous forms of the game. I'm not an advocate for completely Europeanizing American soccer, excuse me. But I do think there are models in places like Mexico, Argentina, Brazil that you can fuse together the best elements of that. The long American regular season is the reason why I constantly believe that there needs to be some sort of apertura clausura split in the United States in our leagues. And we did that when I was at NASL. I thought it was successful. Fans didn't totally get their heads around it at first, but I think by the time we got a few seasons into it, they completely understood it and embraced it, and realized that was one way of keeping the competitive level high if you weren't going to have promotion and relegation, because you had kind of these marathons. in terms of getting results. Right? You couldn't take 2 months off, which you see now in the current format in both MLS and the USL divisions. The other thing you could do is what USL League One is doing this year, which is to throw a cup competition in to the middle of the regular season. NWSL has done that too, actually, in recent years, right? So that keeps the teams sharp, and that has them in a position where it affects their squad choices. At Beyond the 90, we're covering USL League One closely, and I've talked to a few technical staff with League One clubs, and they used to be able to kind of this is going to offend a lot of the pro playoff listeners again, but they used to be able to, lack of a better term, coast through large portions of the USL League One season and hope to still make the playoffs. Now, with the Jagermeister Cup, yes, that's what it's called. That's the sponsor. Cooked into the regular season, you're seeing different squad choices, and you're seeing clubs really go for it, and there's no ability to coast through a season. So even if you're not going to have promotion and relegation, there have to be ways of doing this that make things more competitive. And right now, what we have in the formats, as far as I'm concerned, like I said, NWSL has done some things right, so we'll take them out of it for a bit. But what you have in the formats in MLS and the USL Championship, I think are really problematic. And you have a situation in both those leagues where the percentage of teams that make the playoffs is between 62 and 63%.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so the way I read it is the American way is NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball. And I think that's because when you look at American soccer, there's over 105 years of history. It's not just the last
But the
25 years.
Yeah, the actual history is baseball. Okay, NFL and NBA, those aren't traditional sports. So the actual way is baseball. And for years, and I think the listeners know this, for years, baseball didn't let many teams into the playoffs. You'd get 2 teams or 4 teams in the playoffs. You basically had to be outstanding in the regular season to make the playoffs in Major League Baseball. It was very hard. You'd have teams that would win 90 games, 92. I remember a year when I was a baseball fan, I remember Milwaukee Brewers on multiple occasions winning 90-plus games and not making the playoffs. Okay? So now it's different because baseball has followed the path of the NFL and the NBA, I think, just to make money, letting all these teams into the playoffs. But baseball is actually the traditional sport. Baseball is a sport where there used to be a value on winning the pennant. Guys like Bob Costas, who are the preeminent sportscaster in the U.S., maybe of our generation, decried when baseball started letting wild cards in. Because to him, there was a clear tradition. The playoffs were a tournament of excellence, the top 2 or 4 teams at the end of the season, even though Major League Baseball had 28 teams or whatever. He did not believe that there should be 10 teams or 12 teams or 18 teams or whatever in the playoffs. So, and baseball is a sport that has the same tradition in this country that football does in the UK. Let's just make the direct comparison to England with its impact on local populations, its community basis, its working class roots, and it's over 100 years of tradition. So I don't think the NFL mode of doing playoffs is the traditional American way. College football, we've had a really limited playoff. And for a long time had no playoffs. Now they're expanding the playoffs, which I'm not sure is a good idea. But the American tradition, actually, if you base it around the 2 sports that are the most similar to soccer globally, baseball and college football, didn't do this. They only let the top teams into any sort of postseason, the very top teams.
Right. So maybe Simon meant, the American way is the MLS way. Which to me is, when you have 62% of the teams at the beginning of the season, that will end up in the playoffs. Is that unique? And yes, I guess it is unique in a way, but it's an American way. But really, why is 62% of the teams allowed to make the playoffs? And the simple answer is revenue, is money. If you made it like where the top 5% or top 10% only made the playoffs, then there's fewer games in the playoffs, there's fewer tickets sold, there's fewer people watching games on television. So what they're trying to do is really kind of include as many of those teams as possible so that people keep on buying the tickets to go to the games, that keep on watching on Apple and subscribing. That's the only reason. So the American way to me is the unique American way is making money, which
Yeah,
the
yeah.
way it's set up, it really dilutes that. It makes the regular season meaningless. I've had quite a few people in the last couple of weeks tweet at me and say like, "Hey, Chris, why isn't World Soccer Talk tweeting about everything that's happening in the Major League Soccer? If something interesting happens or something amazing happens that's worth sharing on social media, we will share it." In the last couple of weeks, probably the most amazing thing that happened in Major League Soccer was a raccoon running across the field in the Philly Union game, and people trying to catch it with garbage bins, trying to kind of catch it. To me, the regular season is relatively meaningless because I mean, you can coast along, and all you have to do is be one of that 62% to make your team into the playoffs. Now, if you're a fan that's going to the games, or you're a fan that's if you go into the games and you're a big supporter of, I don't know, Kansas City or LA Galaxy or Colorado Rapids or whoever it may be, then I can understand, right? You're paying, you're celebrating your team, you're going to every game, you're really into it. But for the TV viewer, what's the incentive to watch the middle of the season, basically kind of the April, May, June, and even July?
Uh, look, I'm of the theory, and this is gonna be contrary to what most people think, because I've worked in American soccer. That actually results don't matter in terms of getting crowds, getting people to games. I think what matters is if the atmosphere is cool. Kansas City's atmosphere is clearly cool, right? St. Louis, right? Those sorts of clubs, and if it's a good experience for people, if it's good for families, if it's good for supporters, winning or losing doesn't matter. You can have the worst team in one of these U.S. leagues, but if you do the marketing side properly, if they're cool tifos, if you don't have a front office that are I was going to use an expletive, but front office that is not working with the supporters. If you have all that, you'll do fine. Which is why, Chris, I'm at the point where I think they should just let every team into the playoffs. I'm not kidding. I'm saying that they should have, because it's about revenue, it's about money, it's about everybody having a chance, and like, oh, it's more competitive. I mentioned the Bundesliga, and they're like, oh, Bayern wins it every year, right? All of that stuff. So why don't we have a play-in tournament with the teams from how many teams are they letting in the playoffs now? 18, right? So why don't we have a play-in tournament for teams 19 through 29, 19 through 30 next year? Bracket them in a play-in tournament, give them a cup for finishing 19th, and then let the teams that win that go into a bigger playoff bracket. They might as well just do that now. That actually would be more interesting, and they generate more revenue, and there would be more dates on Apple. Honestly, like the
Yeah,
arbitrary cutoff between team 18 and 19 is ridiculous. And same thing for the USL Championship. USL Championship, it's between team 16 and 17, um, which is, again, a ridiculous arbitrary cutoff, which makes large portions of the season not interesting. So maybe the playoffs do keep it interesting for other teams. But in a league like MLS, where they have rules to enforce parity, which USL does not, it makes no sense to me. I say at this point, I'm only half joking, Chris. Let everybody in. If it's about revenue, it's about making money. Let's have a play-in tournament, so that there would still be some value on the regular season, since they don't want to do Apertura and Clausura. Teams 19 through 30 are in a play-in tournament. They're seeded accordingly. You give the team that wins that play-in tournament a trophy, and then you let them into or maybe you go team 16 through 30 and bracket it differently, and then the team that wins gets a trophy, and then they play in the main playoffs.
yeah. I mean, going back to what Simon said in his tweet, American soccer should do American soccer in its own unique American way. Like, to me, the American way, to me, I mean, I'm a U.S. citizen. You are too, Kartik. We've both lived here. I mean, practically all our lives. For you, your entire life. And to me, the American way is to innovate, is to, be forward thinking, is to be adventurous, is to kind of think bigger and bolder. And the way, so when I think of American companies that really kind of embrace kind of doing things the American way, I think of Nvidia, I think of Tesla, I think of Apple, companies that innovate. They're always looking for ways to, put out good product. And with Major League Soccer, to me, that's not innovation. You have 62% of the teams that qualify for the playoffs. It's basically like kind of giving everyone a medal. And to me, the simple answer is just copy the Mexican Liga MX model, where you have split seasons and you have playoffs. So you still have playoffs, but there's a meaning to the season rather than a long, arduous season, which basically for the TV viewer, there's very little reason to watch. Go ahead and split that up into two, and then that way it makes kind of the first half of the season more meaningful, and then the second half of the season more meaningful, and then maybe in between you can have Leagues Cup in there too. So you kind of make sure that all of the boxes are checked for Major League Soccer. But to me, the way things are done right now is not the American way. Yes, it's copying the NFL model or NBA or Major League Baseball kind of playoff systems. But the difference with those leagues is that they don't have any competition. Major League Soccer is not the NFL of the United States. Major League Soccer is in direct competition with the Premier League, Liga MX, La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A, Liga 1. You go down the list. It's serious competition. That's something NBA doesn't have. That's something that Major League Baseball doesn't have. That's something the NFL doesn't have, other than college football. But so to me, to innovate and to do things the American way is to be innovative, is to try to figure out, okay, how can we actually make this something that's going to be American way? Maybe it's copying parts of the Mexican model, or it's taking some kind of a combination of those things to make it work. But to me, the current system is not the American way. The current system is basically a copycat of NFL, and it's not working.
Yeah, and I have to stress again, the NFL has only become more popular than Major League Baseball in the last 20 or 25 years. So yes, it's this generation. They're into playoffs. There were complaints for years that college football didn't have a playoff. College football had a system. College football is a sport most like football in Europe, right? We've talked about this with traveling fans, with the community basis of it, and they didn't have a playoff at all until 2014, right? And people would complain that the champion was being determined. I mean, because not everybody played everybody, the champion was being determined arbitrarily, but still. I don't think there was that much wrong with that system personally, because there would be an effort to play off the top two teams in a final every year under the system in college football. That's probably the way it should be. So you could have an Eastern Conference champion versus the Western Conference champion in an American league. In baseball, it used to be the AL champion versus the NL champion. I do get, this is one thing I do acknowledge, that because you cannot balance schedules due to the size of this country, that you need some sort of way to determine the champion, which is why I've said, like, baseball had a 14 playoff for most of my life, and then it expanded to 8 teams, which Bob Costas was angry about, as I said, and now I think it's 12 or 14 or something. I don't follow baseball anymore, so I don't know. But there used to be, even acknowledging that, Chris, there used to be some sort of, okay, we have to have a playoff, but it has to be the best teams. Actually, I remember when the NFL playoffs were only 8 teams. Now I think they're like 16 or something. NBA always had 16 teams, right? That was always kind of, and they were perennially teams with losing records getting to the NBA playoffs when I was younger, when I used to follow that league. Part of the reason I stopped following the league, quite frankly. This is now kind of a modern American thing because, as you said, Chris, it's based on revenue. That's the bottom line. It's based on revenue. It's based on money. It's not based on any tradition. It's not based on American culture. It's not based on innovation. As you said, it is based on maximizing the ability to make money for teams and leagues and for the leagues themselves.
Okay, let's move on to listener mailbag. We've got a bunch of mail from you, the listeners. First up is Coach Sean to talk about MLS Season Pass. Coach Sean says MLS is the billionaire boys club, and it's trying to push out any competition. I have loved Real Salt Lake since day one, but can no longer support MLS as the top American soccer league. They have done just as much to hurt the game as to help it. Daniel says, I'll care about American soccer leagues when they implement promotion and relegation, flip to a normal calendar, and stop expanding teams. This goes for the USL also. No one needs 30-team leagues with everyone and their mother getting a club. Wing Cake says $15 a month for the MLS Season Pass app. Not available on Android phones. Should have signed with Paramount Plus and ESPN Plus. Keep games on local TV and signed the Spanish rights to NBC Telemundo. How do you sell both languages for a bargain? $250 million a year. Mike says, I'm watching USL every week. US Open Cup issue was the final nail in the coffin for any MLS fandom. Coach Sean, once again, I have fully enjoyed watching USL, and even my teenage boys team has begun watching. I truly hope USL can get a D1 status and force MLS to show they want they want to care about American soccer for all. Andy says on the latest episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast, Kartik asked what minor sport league is receiving as much broadcast television coverage as USL. The United Football League, currently in its first season, receives more broadcast television coverage than the USL. I realize now that Kartik might have been considering local broadcast coverage rather than exclusively national broadcast coverage, in which case I'm not sure how to answer Kartik's question. Also, please add Hartford to the list of USL teams who have a robust local television deal. Del Boy says, it's way too expensive for a minor league in the world. £2 per month would have made much more sense for MLS Season Pass. Asking for £15 per month to watch a long past Benteke should be a crime. You can charge that for the Premier League, but not Major League Soccer. It's a ridiculous price point, doomed to fail. And that's something just to add to that too, is for those of us in the United States, MLS Season Pass is $15. Usually in the local currency around the world, it's that 15. Basically, in Britain it's £15. I think in South America it's $15. And depending where you are in the world, that could be a lot of money. It could be really expensive depending on the currency rate and the currency exchange. Kyle says, I would say part of why fans are not subscribing to MLS Season Pass is because people don't know MLS is even on Apple. The only time sports shows show any kind of highlights is when Messi does something for Miami. Hence the reason why MLS is Messi League Soccer. The marketing of the league outside of Messi has been atrocious. Matt says the idea that the MLS is potentially comparable to the European leagues from a quality and a pitch perspective is so disingenuous. Bart says, I watch, but I can tell you why. A lot of families cannot afford it. This Apple deal cut out a lot of the kids who would love to watch their team, but their parents just can't afford the expense. If you want to grow soccer in the US, the one channel only crap has to go. MLS is really missing the ticket with this deal. Aram says, the only reason I have MLS Season Pass is because it comes with my LAFC season ticket membership. I don't think I would have it if it wasn't for that. And that's coming from a huge LAFC fan. Brandon says, I always see MLS fans saying that Europe will eventually follow the US model. They become more emboldened on this point as portions of European football adopt things like VAR and salary caps. It came close to modeling US sports with the Super League, but that died after fans expressed outrage and rioted. Do you think MLS fans are right, or do they underestimate European fans' passion for the current system? That's a great question, Brandon. I think it's a couple of different things. First of all, it's a result of a lot more American owners owning big teams in Europe. So you look at England, you look at France, you look at Italy. Those countries have a lot of US owners, so they're definitely having an impact and having some influence. Was one of the big reasons why the Super League was attempted, was because I think of the influence of the American owners, in addition to Real Madrid and Inter Milan, etc., etc., etc. But I think, in answer to your question, though, I think MLS fans do underestimate the passion of European fans to a certain extent, and I think most of it is the European fans that do stand up and protest and riot and boycott and do some really try to stop the system, right? Try to make change, try to prevent the Super League from happening, try to prevent private equity investing in the Bundesliga and the media rights. And we saw what happened with that this season in the German Bundesliga. That was a huge protest over several weeks that was organized. So I think in some ways, I think MLS fans may underestimate that. Last but not least, Martha and Jeff say we have Apple TV Plus and MLS Season Pass. We're Sounders fans. We rarely get to watch a game now because we can't always watch live. And we can't access as a replay only the short summary of the game. We were thrilled that a game was broadcast on Fox recently. We recorded it on our YouTube TV account. There was also an hour of post-game with local analysts who have a long history with the team. Fabulous. MLS deal is taking spirit and caring and fans away from our team. All right, listeners, we had some more messages in the mailbag, but we'll save that for the next episode. In the meantime, if you do have any questions for us, or if you'd like to kind of voice your opinions on anything we've discussed, or share your opinions or rants and raves, we'd love to hear from you. There's a bunch of different ways you can get in touch. The website's probably the best place, worldsoccertalk.com, and then click on podcasts and leave your comments in the most recent episode. We're on youtube.com/worldsoccertalk. You can leave your comments there. Twitter, X, @worldsoccertalk. Facebook.com/worldsoccertalk. Email, which is web@worldsoccertalk.com. And then last but not least, voicemail, which is 561-247-4625. So on behalf of Kartik and I, we'd like to thank you for listening, and we'll probably be a few weeks before we're back again. I'm heading out to Italy and to Wales, doing some reporting there and seeing some relatives. So I'm going to be away for a while, but we will be back probably in a few weeks. I'm not sure exactly when yet, but thank you for listening. Enjoy your football.